Good evening, everyone. My name is Tara Tadimala, and I will be the moderator for tonight's special episode of EYEJ Speaks. You are watching part 2 of a special series on connectivity. EYEJ, Empowering Youth Exploring Justice, serves over 1,500 youth with the mission of empowering and amplifying the voices of teens and preteens by bridging them with diverse individuals to engage in interactive discussions centered around social justice. We do so through programs including YODJ, or Youth Online Discussing Justice, and the EYEJ Youth Council. YODJ is a 12-week program for 6th through 12th graders created as a response to the pandemic. YODJ ensures youth have a virtual platform to exchange ideas and gain perspective on social justice topics with diverse community members, peers, and volunteers. The EYEJ Youth Council embodies a group of impressive youth ages 15 to 25 from all across districts in Cleveland, who together are brainstorming issues and addressing community challenges faced by them and their peers. Over the last 10 weeks, our discussion series, EYEJ Speaks, has been hosting timely and compelling social justice conversations on subjects ranging from toxic stress and exploring money to civil rights, taking inspiration from the Youth Council and the Youth Online Discussing Justice program. Tonight's conversation on connectivity was inspired by the Youth Council, who decided to make this their social justice initiative. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to read their effectual statement, which can be found on the EYEJ blog. Since their statement's release, they have raised money in support of their connectivity work, hosted a Zoom protest, started a petition to encourage the mayor to provide broadband internet access to all Cleveland residents and e-learning devices for all of Cleveland's youth. And this is only the beginning. Due to their passion for their subject, EYEJ Speaks wanted to use this platform to magnify their work and this important subject. Before we jump into the discussion, just a reminder to ask questions, make comments, and use the hashtags #EYEJSpeaks and #SocialJustice in the comment section. Follow EYEJ and the EYEJ Youth Council on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram for the latest updates. Last week's connectivity discussion examined the implications of insufficient broadband access and digital redlining in low-income and African-American communities throughout Cleveland. Tonight, we will discuss digital literacy, implications of connectivity to job access, and solutions. Connectivity is a national social justice issue, not just in Cleveland and Columbus, but cities such as Detroit, Michigan, Memphis, Tennessee, and Miami, Florida. It's essential to examine the challenges, but we want viewers tonight to understand how they can be empowered to advocate for broadband in their own communities. I'd like to first introduce our speakers. Bishara Addison, Senior Manager with Policy and Strategic Initiatives at Towards Employment. Philip D. Althouse, an attorney at the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, working in the Economic Justice Unit. Kendall Smith, who's a youth speaker with EYEJ. Danak Pantachobo, who's an EYEJ Youth Council summer intern. Delaney Jones, who's our lead community organizer for EYEJ, and Willis Ferguson, a local network engineer. So first, we'll go ahead and get started the discussion with our first question. I wanted to start today's discussion with this broad question that I saw online and thought would be perfect to use as the theme for much of the conversation moving forward. Can America remain competitive when tens of millions of its residents are without access to home computers and affordable, high-speed broadband connectivity? In a nation where many employers will only accept online applications, where truck drivers and other blue-collar workers are expected by their employers to access work assignments digitally, and where so many students of higher learning need to do their coursework online. This is a question open to any of the speakers.
Yeah, so I can start by touching on this. So we know that this issue of connectivity has huge implications for youth academic development. That's been discussed in previous EYEJ Speaks. But as you alluded to, Tara, this issue touches almost every realm of our society. So there's the social isolation and the mental health effects of that isolation. That's a huge one. But also, what about registering to vote? What about filing for unemployment, participating in telehealth services, gaining access to job postings? So there are so many essential services that are now accessible mostly or solely through digital means. So also the topic of the deep inequality that exists in America, this has been talked about a lot recently with the Black Lives Matter movement. And this issue of connectivity is so deeply intertwined with the inequality that exists. And we really can't move forward as a society until we allow all of our citizens to be able to participate in that society, which is mostly online now.
I'll jump in. This is Bishara Addison. From a workforce development perspective, and to your question around can America remain competitive economically if there's a digital divide, and the answer is definitely no. There was research from Burning Glass Technologies, and they found that nearly 8 out of 10 middle skill jobs now require a degree of some sort of digital proficiency. And I'll distinguish that digital proficiency and tech jobs are not the same thing. So we're really looking at, does someone have, particularly from like a digital inclusion perspective, we're looking at the ability of individuals and groups to access and use information and communication technologies. And that encompasses access to the internet, the availability of hardware, relevant kind of content and services, training for digital literacy skills. That is what we kind of mean by, does someone have digital proficiency? And if we know that 8 out of 10 jobs require that, particularly middle skill jobs, and we know that middle skill jobs are growing, if you as an individual want to compete in this job market, you are going to have digital skills, which requires a community framework around digital inclusion. And since we know that we have a digital divide, and again, what I mean by digital divide is that individuals lack the hardware, the community lacks the infrastructure, such as broadband access or the fiber that you run in the community to make sure that homes and communities can be wired, and also the skills. If we do not have a digital inclusion framework and are committed to raising dollars and supporting that inclusion, then we will be at a disadvantage economically to compete on a world stage.
We definitely agree. Anyone else want to address that question?
Yeah, let me jump on that. Internet access today is very, very important for good education, because without education, I don't know how the society or the community can change positively. Education contributes to a lot of research. Education can diminish the crimes in the society, because when people they are educated, well, they don't think anymore about the crimes, they don't think anymore about the violence, So I will say access to high speed internet, very important for social positive change.
We definitely agree. And going off of that discussion about the digital divide and digital inclusion, the EYEJ Youth Council has decided to advocate for connectivity for all in Cleveland and e-learning devices for youth. The council has taken several bold steps to discuss this work on a national level, including a petition campaign and hosting virtual rallies. Kendall, Denakpan, and Delaney, can you share what the process has been like to engage in this digital activism? Describe what's next for EYEJ in this work, and how can other young people take up this cause in their communities?
Yeah, so to your question about what it's been like to engage in digital activism right now, I think we're in a totally unprecedented time right now, not only in a global pandemic, but a recession, major socio-cultural movements going, all of these things happening at once. So people are, one, at home a lot more than they usually would be. Two, a lot of the existing inequalities that have deepened due to the pandemic are really being exposed right now. And then three, people are ready to mobilize. People are talking about the social issues happening around them and people want to act. So we really need to seize on this unique opportunity that this period in time presents, and we need to mobilize the entire Cleveland community to fix this connectivity issue as soon as possible. And this is exactly what EYEJ has been working on. So we held a virtual protest. We have a petition to the mayor of Cleveland out for people to sign. And then upcoming, we have a town hall with government officials. We have a letter writing campaign, a phone zap event, lots of press coverage coming out. So there's a lot to look out for in the near future, and a lot of ways coming up for people to engage with what we're doing. But finally, I'd say that the biggest thing right now that young people can do to contribute is to speak to your local elected officials. Like, let them know that you recognize how much of a problem this is and that we need an urgent solution before these kids start remote schooling again in the fall.
Right, we definitely agree on that point. And Kendall or Jacqueline, would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, what Delaney says is 100% right, because the divide, I would say digital divide, was before a huge issue in the society. But during this situation, pandemic crisis situation, it gets worse. I found out personally, not do anything to solve that issue is a social discrimination. It's not social disparity, it's social discrimination. Because how we can understand 38,000 students cannot have access to internet during this situation where everything moves online above education. How they can have access to education? We prevent people from going outside because of COVID. We ask people, we require them to stay at home. It's normal, it's for protection. But what about the other protection? About the healthcare, telemedicine online? We need access to internet for all those things. We need access to internet for all those things. The students, 38,000 students, seems the student, 27,000 families no have access to internet in 21st century world, where I will say internet is a fourth utility, like water, electricity. That's a social discrimination. We have to solve that. Very important. Before this forecast starts.
Oh, definitely. And Kendall, would you like to touch on how being part of that discussion as a youth has been and part of this movement?
Yeah, I agree with what Delaney said. It is kind of, we're working in the midst of all these things. So it's kind of, for me, it's a foreign environment. I've never been digital with anything. I never really been in a program like this. So it's different for me, but it feels good to be like working toward something I know that we all need, because before this, I didn't pay this problem really any attention. So to see like how big of a problem it is, to see it like, up close, it's like good to be working towards this change, because I really do feel like it's essential. And seeing other people, when I first came here and I saw all the diversity, it was a good thing for me to see that other people care about the same thing, because this really is happening to a number of people, a variety of people. So it's good to be working with them on this problem, because we really do need this to happen. And as far as the youth, I feel like what Delaney said, talk to your local elected officials, sign the petitions, come to our webinars, get educated, just push for this change, because we all need it.
Yeah, of course. And for those who are joining us today, audience, we definitely encourage you to follow our EYEJ social media pages, and you can follow along with EYEJ and Youth Council's progress on this movement. The next question is for Philip. As a lawyer with the Economic Justice Unit of Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, there are significant correlations to your clients and people impacted by the digital divide. Last week's EYEJ Speaks episode described the relationships between race, poverty, and connectivity. From your 2018 annual report, 82% of legal aids clients made less than $25,000 a year. 54% are Black, and 76% live in Cuyahoga County. This means it's likely that a significant number of your clients lack digital connectivity. Can you discuss what you're seeing and the intersections between this conversation and your work?
Talking about the work that the work group that I'm a member of does, it's sort of like under the number of economic justice, but we do a number of things, including policy reform, legal advocacy, and education to empower clients, and all of that's designed to help them overcome economic barriers and gain some measure of justice when they're victims of injustice. And there's a good deal of that around today, and it's compounded right now by the pandemic. The economic situation in Cleveland is dire, and that holds true across the country. So there is a correlation. I mean, we've already, some of the panelists have already alluded to the connection between digital access or broadband access, break it down that way, and poverty in Cleveland. There are a couple things. There was an interesting article published, I think, a year or so ago by Belt magazine, and also there was a study by the Brookings Institute on about Cleveland and what was described as a digital divide. That means that there is a gap between households within the city of Cleveland based on economic status, based on the wealth of the individual households, and Cleveland and surrounding communities. The data that I gathered showed that about as many as 53,000 households in Cleveland didn't have broadband access. And they might have cable access, and the people who live in those homes might have cell phone access, but TV doesn't help you if you're tasked with remote learning because you can't go to school. And cell phones don't replace a PC. So there is a problem. Now what we see, and I could draw you some correlations between digital access and say other things that consumer advocates see, for example, finances, mortgages, automobile loans, credit card. There are people who are low income tend to get the least desirable services and the worst deals. Historically, there's been redlining of low income communities and communities of color that are predominantly African American or Hispanic speaking or other minority groups. That's true with Cleveland. That's been the case with Cleveland. We saw a good bit of that. It was exposed in a graphic way by the financial collapse that occurred 10 years ago with the mortgage market. So there are some major problems. The question is, I guess, like how do you overcome that and establish what might be, for example, policy reform in the part of the city of Cleveland, and perhaps establishing an infrastructure that's conducive to community-based broadband access. There's a glaring need for that.
Right, and building off of that point, from a technology standpoint, Willis, can you speak to the infrastructure that would be needed to increase connectivity for the residents of Cleveland? Is there a model other communities are using in the country that can be cited as a successful example?
Certainly. The issue is very complex. I recently discovered that most of the telecoms in the country, when they laid down their fiber, I won't say that they purposely avoided low income areas, but you can literally see the fiber map. The fiber will run right down the divide between the good neighborhoods and the bad neighborhoods. And they don't offer that connectivity to low income houses. And so the infrastructure necessary is something that we are actually proposing, and it's very simple. This is not expensive. No one had to risk anything to do this. It's you simply utilize the resources that are already available, say the public libraries, the school district, and you let the public use that internet. The infrastructure might it might take a year in total or 2 years in total to get it fully rolled out, but the infrastructure is simply a high-speed wireless to the home. It's not expensive, and it will solve the problem for a lot of these children.
That's great, and that's amazing work that you guys are working on. So our next question.
This is Bishara again. I do want to offer that there's a complexity to this issue, that, you know, we know what our North Star is, that, and I believe leaders in our community understand the North Star, is that we do have to make sure that there is digital inclusion for Cleveland to be economically competitive, particularly in a pandemic. There's no way we can do right by children and not have digital inclusion. So with that being said, if we use that as a framework and an assumption that everyone agrees on that point, it begs the following complexities. The first is there fiber kind of laid down in the community? And one of the challenges, and I think this is what, there's some studies that call it digital redlining, where fiber is laid down and updated in certain communities over others. Part of that has to do with companies, because they are, you know, profit maximizers. They're driven by sales and profits, are laying down fiber where they have customers, which means that those who are, you know, lower income, which if we look at some Cleveland data specific to that, we know that there's some challenges with affordability in Cleveland specifically. So in metropolitan households, you know, nationally, Cleveland is in the top 5 worst connected communities. And the median household income is about $26,000 a year, and more than a third of families have no internet access at all. So the companies that are laying down fiber as profit maximizers are laying down fiber where they have customers. And if they don't have customers in certain communities, then those communities are going to lack access. So the question is, who takes responsibility for that problem? And the challenge is, when no one takes responsibility, we have a problem that means that we're at a complete disadvantage. So one, you have to, one complexity is someone has to take responsibility for that problem. The second is cost. And even though there are low cost mechanisms to address this problem, if you scale that, someone has to pay for that. So who pays for it, which again gets at responsibility, what line item does it fall in, and is it federal, state, local philanthropy, or a combination of all of those funding sources? And braiding that and putting that puzzle together is not a simple task when everyone has different timelines for budgets. We're in a pandemic. The state session, when they are looking at how to decide on our state budget, it's kind of off cycle right now. And so there's lots of complexity there. And so timing then becomes an issue. And then let's say we were, you know, if we look at our dream scenario, if we were able to actually lay down the fiber, make sure everyone had devices. Number one, we know that devices are not made to last. and technology is rapidly changing. So that device is going to have a shelf life of a couple years, which means there's going to have to be new devices deployed to all of these homes, number one. And then number two, also the fiber and broadband and all of the technologies, and I'm not an expert in 5G and all the technologies that are companies are spearheading and changing and updating, but whatever technology we have today might look different in 10 years, which means someone has to be responsible for maintenance. And again, that gets at who is responsible and what budget line item does it fall in. Do individuals bear that cost, or are we going to treat this as a public utility? And if we treat it as a public utility, how does that imperative and priority weigh against other big community priorities? Like, a lot of families are dealing with rent issues right now. A lot of families are very fearful about eviction. Well, that also has a line item. And so our priority has to also be weighed in context of all of these other priorities. That doesn't change the imperative, it doesn't change the urgency, and it doesn't change the fact that we have to figure out a way to solve this problem urgently. But that is why it's difficult to solve. And I don't envy the folks who are in decision-making roles who have to think about how to solve for that.
Thank you for your input. That was great. So building off of that, this urgency is definitely prevalent in our community. A few weeks ago, it was announced that Cuyahoga County, the Cleveland Foundation, and telecommunications giant T-Mobile announced Thursday the Greater Cleveland Digital Equity Fund to strategically and efficiently address immediate and long-term needs surrounding broadband access, computing devices, digital literacy, and technology support. They have formed the Greater Cleveland Digital Equity Coalition and have pledged $3 million in commitments. An additional $1 million from the George Gunn Fund will target improvements to digital access in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District by providing laptops and hotspot and Wi-Fi technology. While this is excellent news, is this enough? What is your take on this new coalition, and what considerations need to be discussed to make this investment impactful for all Cleveland residents?
If I could jump in one more time, this is Bishara again. I think it's directionally correct. So urgently, we need to get devices in the hands of families, and we need to make sure that they have internet access. And so the hotspot solution is the most efficient solution we have right now, then that is what we must do to address the immediate need of schools needing to reopen, and that many schools are going to take an online or remote learning approach. At the same time, that is not a long-term solution. And so two things have to happen at the same time, that we both have to raise money and address the immediate need, while at the same time, we have to develop a long-term strategy, because if we are moving into the, into this digital age, and, as was mentioned, and I've mentioned, that increasingly from a workforce perspective, you will have to have digital skills. And this isn't necessarily digital skills to be in a tech job. This is just digital skills because jobs that currently exist are increasingly going to require some sort of digital proficiency. So if we understand that from an economic perspective, making sure that digital inclusion is a community priority is also needs to be a part of our economic development strategy, then a long-term solution is also needed. And that, because it includes ownership, budgets, and responsibility upon who's going to end up maintaining that effort, whether it's decentralized and, by provider. So like providers could be Digital C in their nonprofit approach. It could be AT&T, Spectrum, Verizon. I might be leaving somebody out, I'm sure I am, but those are the different providers, and that is a market-driven, decentralized approach. If we rely on them to support digital inclusion, or there has to be more regulation and more support from our local government which is going to also require policy and some lobbying with the state and federal government to raise sufficient funds to both deploy resources and maintain them over the long time and update them. So that would need to be included in a long-term strategy. So two things have to exist at the same time. The current equity fund is directionally correct for what we need to do today, but it is insufficient as a long-term strategy.
I don't even think that it's sufficient for a short-term strategy. My issue is that these companies are profit-driven, and they really, the betterment of our children is a passing thought for them. The money is more important. The best digital inclusion that most of the big boys offer right now is an inadequate solution for pay. You have to give them money to get a substandard solution. That's not a solution. The hotspots will get the job done for the children in the interim. I agree it is a short-term solution. I don't even feel it's a good one, because if you're going to invest $3 million or more into a temporary solution, just initiate a long-term solution. That's all.
I'd like to say something just to add on to what Willis said. I think it's a Band-Aid solution. We're in a crisis mode right now, and this is great. Talking about it, I've been an educator. I taught at the secondary level in Milwaukee well before I became a lawyer, and it, I wonder how well the remote learning that goes on would work for elementary level students, especially the first, third grade. I don't know. I mean, they're talking about complexities. That's a complexity, and yet the many, or if not most or all of the students won't be able to return to classes anytime soon, and certainly at the beginning of the semester, as best I can tell. In terms of education, though, this is really sort of like a temporary fix to enable learning, but there is a concern about in terms of learning and education on a number of levels that I have, and it actually intersects with economic issues that plague Cleveland and other urban areas across the country. Let's just focus on Cleveland, though. Pay to play is a big deal, and the providers that are in place right now are pretty pricey. Just like broadband service, if you can get it, it's often bundled with TV service by the providers, and they're constantly increasing the prices. I mean, once they give people a teaser rate and then they move on. And so I'm kind of what Willis was maybe suggesting was maybe a plan that some kind of a design that would be more community based and perhaps have a nonprofit structure versus a for-profit structure. The other thing is, like education, it's good to keep in mind, as far as Cleveland is concerned, about the history of CMSD students. Well, I see some head shaking here. Well, just the statistics on standardized testing and educational attainment aren't great, and that's been the case for Cleveland for the longest. So I think that, from my point of view, I think that broadband service is great as a learning tool to augment learning, but learning has to be essential. People have to be literate. The technology is outpacing literacy. If you look at the workforce, with the constant changes in technology, being competent and facile with dealing with internet technology is a chore. I mean, when I deal with consumers, a lot of the older consumers don't have a clue. They don't even know what a computer. They wouldn't even know how to operate a keyboard, and so there are all these challenges. On top of that, though, again, the classroom challenges, because we're talking about successive generations of people entering the workforce in the city of Cleveland. What are they going to look like? I mean, they could be, I think it's really important for them to be not just like literate in terms of the technology, but also literate overall, understanding their relationship to one another in the world and the community and the system that they're operating in and all that. It's really important. So I guess I'd also like to emphasize the need for any kind of a program to consider education as a linchpin.
And I'd like to offer this, Bishara, again, that that's why inclusion, broadly defined, is so important, because all of these systems intersect. So we're taught, the purpose of this particular webinar is digital inclusion around job access. That, at least that's kind of like, that was the theme. And now we're talking about K-12 education and literacy, and it gets into adult literacy. Well, you know, one of the reasons why we have poor literacy rates in part has to do with school quality, instruction, and all of the things that, you know, there's lots of evidence and research around. But there's also some reasons that have nothing to do with teacher quality, and it's lead poisoning. Teachers have nothing to do with the fact that kids are coming into school lead poisoned, which impacts their ability to learn. And we have generations of children that have been lead poisoned. And I bet you anything, and there was actually, I think it was a study recently done about Cleveland and the connection between lead poisoning and the criminal justice system. And so, you know, illiteracy is a huge problem in Cleveland, and specifically being able to being able to read for information, locate information in a job context is a barrier to economic mobility. But that is separate from digital access and digital literacy. I would argue that you need to have strong literacy skills to be able to adopt digital literacy skills. So these are compounding problems that all need to be resolved almost simultaneously. So digital inclusion is not an isolated problem, and if we were to solve for it, then all of our problems are solved. Because, you know, thinking about remote learning, well, if you have little ones, so thinking about like the K4 age group, then parents almost need to be present, or some adult needs to be present to support their children in the digital learning, because they're kids. Like, if you're a little one and you don't have an adult telling you to focus, you're not going to focus, and that's just because you're a kid. And that also means if an adult is present, you're either paying someone to support your children in their learning endeavor while you are working, or you are not working, maybe because you've been laid off or furloughed, or you're a dislocated worker because of the pandemic, which is that's also not a good thing, because we want people to be working and having an income. Or we're in a situation where those children are being left with maybe a relative or a family member. And in a pandemic, particularly when we think about, you know, who those family members are, they're often grandparents or great aunts or great uncles. And so they're in a situation where you're putting children in a home with someone who would be considered a vulnerable population during a pandemic. So there's no easy solution here. It is super complex. And, you know, I don't have any of the answers, but we do know that one step is, well, we can't resolve any of these issues if people don't have internet access and devices in their homes. So that is a enabling condition to solve for lots of other problems we have to deal with urgently right now.
Definitely, we completely agree. I wanted to continue that conversation on digital literacy. So implications for job seekers, what you briefly touched on, Bishara, go beyond the ability to find a job or access to job training. Issues of online networking, polishing up their resume and cover letter are also vital, but paramount to all those things is digital literacy. If you do not have the digital skills employers are looking for, regardless of how everything else matches up, you are still at a disadvantage. Bishara, can you discuss how this is addressed towards employment? And then Delaney, can you describe your take on this work from an EYEJ perspective?
Sure. So I believe this matters for the Cleveland workforce that two of our most thriving industries in Northeast Ohio, healthcare and manufacturing, are both industries where the jobs are increasingly middle skill, and those are positions that require more than a high school diploma, but less than a 4-year degree or a bachelor's degree. And if we know that 82% of middle skill jobs require digital skills, so that's the ability to use just technology in a job. And we also know that jobs that have digital proficiency embedded in them, overall pay almost a 20% premium over non-digital roles. So those are jobs that don't require digital skills. Individuals who don't have that proficiency are going to be locked out of those jobs. And healthcare and manufacturing in particular are becoming increasingly digitized, where you have to use technology to do jobs that at some point, maybe 15 or 20 or even 30 years ago, you did not need to have that kind of digital proficiency to do the job, which means our current workers need to do some reskilling, and new workers coming into the industry will need to have some of those skills up front. So towards employment, we see the cross section of all of these issues that we've been discussing. And I would say we had an in-person career readiness workshop that, 2 weeks in person. And now, we can no longer do these in-person workshops right now. So we've had to have virtual workshops. We ended up doing a survey of some of our potential participants and said, do you have the device, the hardware, the technology, the broadband access to be able to even participate in a virtual workshop? And we were able to identify a few that did. One of the challenges cited, though, was that because the libraries, like Cleveland Public Library, closed during the pandemic, because they had to, that actually created a barrier because many of those we were serving were using the library for the device and internet access. And so in closing our libraries, that became a real barrier to job search, doing resumes, and participation. So we have kind of come up with a device library where we're kind of loaning out devices. We're not at a point where we can afford to just give every single person we serve a device. So we're looking at who has a need and then loaning them out and then trying to get them back. And so we've developed kind of an approach that's, kind of working for us right now because we've been able to hold multiple workshops. So that's how we're addressing the immediate need. And because a lot of our job placement, so we help connect people to careers, a lot of that job placement is in healthcare and manufacturing. So we're not seeing individuals, we are not struggling with placing individuals so much in jobs because there are jobs available, but the barrier really is a barrier to participation to get ready for that job. And so we're trying to address that. And like I've said earlier on this webinar, the solution we have is not really a long-term solution. It's the best solution we have right now to address immediate needs. And we're going to have to think through what a longer-term approach is. And, some will say never waste a good crisis. So how can we use this opportunity to decentralize our work and really meet people where they are in small groups to be able to deliver services in a way that, would not have been cost effective before, and frankly isn't cost effective now, but is the only way to really deliver services. And so that's going to require us to raise money to be able to adopt a new approach. I have a feeling that if we're successful in raising the money and deploying that approach is actually going to end up being more effective. And we wouldn't have been able to do that if we weren't in a situation that required us to do so. So that's not to say that where the situation we're in is in any way, shape, or form a good thing. But you can always find a little light in the darkness. And so that's what we have to fight and work towards as an agency, because people need services now, and we can't sit on our hands while there's that need.
And Delaney, would you like to talk more on that from like your work with EYEJ and the Youth Council?
Yeah, so EYEJ right now is mainly concerned with the question of how do we get all of Cleveland youth connected. So in this discussion, we've been talking about the concept of digital literacy. We've been talking about how to create long-term sustainable solutions. And that's something that we've really been talking about and thinking about at EYEJ. We know that this work doesn't just end when we get internet access to all Cleveland youth. This doesn't even end when we get all of the youth the devices that they need to access the internet. We won't have true connectivity for all of Cleveland youth until the youth know how to effectively use the technology that they have, which is what we've been talking about. They need to know what types of resources are available to them on the internet. They need to know how to turn on their computer and connect it to the internet. They need to know who to call if they're having a tech issue. Those are all components to this. So obviously, as we've been saying, the strategy needs to be long-term and sustainable in nature, and that's exactly what EYEJ is advocating for. So this also gets at what we spoke about earlier regarding the Greater Cleveland Digital Equity Fund and the solutions that have been recently proposed involving hotspots. I appreciate what Bishara said about meeting the immediate need now, but then also thinking about how to be sustainable in the long term. And that's really important because while hotspots, might be a Band-Aid solution now, obviously they aren't going to do anything to connect our youth if the youth don't even know how to turn the hotspot on. So an effective solution needs to have a clear and very comprehensive digital literacy component. And this also goes back to what Bishara was speaking to as to responsibility. Someone needs to take responsibility for covering these previously unreached areas of Cleveland and paying for that cost. But then someone also has to take responsibility for teaching the youth all of these digital literacy skills that we've been talking about. So this is something that EYEJ has been thinking about. Will the schools be able to teach them this? Will the libraries? Will the community development corporations? Which entity is going to take responsibility for teaching these skills? So that's something that we've been thinking about and something that we've been trying to figure out from the EYEJ side.
Awesome. And we touched on this a little bit earlier, but the EYEJ Youth Council team had a Zoom protest recently. And so in this connectivity conversation, we often discuss the negative challenges faced by low-income communities or communities of color, but it's also important to celebrate the impact that digital access has on advocacy and social justice movements. So Kendall, can you discuss EYEJ's recent Zoom protest? What was the purpose of the protest? What activities took place during the rally? And are there any future plans for other virtual demonstrations?
So during the protest, it was difficult. It was foreign to me because, for one, I've never been to a protest, and I've never, thought I would have to do it digitally. But it was good. We discussed, what the problem was and what we thought some solutions would be. We were writing on little papers, just getting everybody involved, getting everybody, wanted to do more. So we were doing, chants, like we would at a real protest, getting everybody amped up because, we want everybody to feel some type of way about this problem because, I feel like in a way everybody is related to this problem. So, what we plan to do next is we plan to do a lot, we still have the petition, we still, doing webinars, we're doing the YouTube videos. I just recently was doing an interview with Channel 19, I believe. So, we're setting up, ways to where we can, how do I put this, spread the word and, get other people involved. So I feel like, that's the first step, getting people aware of the problem and, taking steps to actually get people involved and solve it.
Definitely. And Dinakpan or Delaney, would you like to add on to what your experience was with the Zoom protest?
Yeah, I can touch on it. And then Denpan, you can add on to my comments. But I thought the Zoom protest was really successful in getting people excited and mobilized about this issue, and for spreading awareness. And really, this needs to be a community-led solution, as we've been talking about before. So it's really important that the public is aware of the work that we're doing, and that we get a large segment of our community on board with what we're doing. And that was the goal of the Zoom protest. And I thought it was pretty successful at doing that. And we have, as I touched on before, we have a number of other upcoming events towards the same goal. So everyone should be on the lookout for those.
Right. As Kendall and Delaney said, is right. The program is very critical. So the Zoom protest require full participation from everyone. That's the main goal. This issue is not for brown community, black community, or white people. No solution. This require everyone, social full participation. Bashar talked earlier about job and everything. I totally agree. But before getting there, you need skill. Before getting a job, you need skill. Among the youth who don't have access to internet now, I will say who don't have access right now to education because we don't know yet what's going. They have dream to be doctor too, you know. They have dream to be nurse, whatever, you know. So this requires full participation, but this is the beginning. Is not the last one. So Zoom protest is, I will say, is one of the advocacy strategy. So we saw in different cities, they succeed with their broadband, community broadband. We saw in Chattanooga, in Tennessee, we saw in Washington, D.C., we saw in New York City, New Jersey. It was very easy. We saw different approach. They succeed. But here, in this context, we have to think about the right approach. What kind of a business model plan option we want to choose, you know? But this is for social goal. It's for social goal. It's for social goal. It's not for business and
Right. Yeah, I had the opportunity to attend the protest, and it was extremely powerful. I commend the Youth Council on advocating for that and promoting that. So going on to the next question, we want to briefly discuss 2020 is a census year, which means all Americans are counted to determine how funds will be allocated for the next decade to local schools, fire departments, and other community resources. As of July, less than 2/3 of Americans have sent in responses for the US 2020 census, and those response rates are even worse in major cities across Ohio. As of July, 47% of Clevelanders have replied, 49.8% of people living in Toledo have sent back their information, and 60% of people living in Akron have responded. Can any one of you talk about how a low response rate can have implications over the next decade when it comes to advocating for greater connectivity in Cleveland, particularly Ohio overall? And this is open to anyone.
Yeah, this is Bishara, and this is a very serious issue. So one, please fill out the census. We were already one of the most undercounted communities, particularly the congressional district that we're in, which most of us are in Congresswoman Fudge's congressional district, one of the most undercounted congressional districts in the country. So we were already undercounted, not to mention the fact that like lots of folks have not filled out the survey. And I think there's a lot of concern and tension around, citizenship, which the systems don't talk to each other. So we want to count every single person in the United States, regardless of whether they have citizenship. And so it's not like if you fill out the survey, all of a sudden another agency is going to get that information and then report you. And so the systems do not talk to each other, but I can also understand that the rhetoric, particularly from this presidential administration, would suggest otherwise. The second thing is we know that there are individuals who just don't fill out the census because they don't know how their information is going to be used, and census information is taken very seriously and is protected. The reason why it's so important is the allocation of resources is often based on poverty data that is collected through the census. And so when Towards Employment pursues a federal grant, we have to use census data to demonstrate that our community is quote unquote deserving of this funding, that there is a greater need. Most of our applications say that when we're applying for federal funding, that you have to have a community that's high poverty, high crime. It's not a good thing that our community often is high poverty, high crime, but without being able to demonstrate that, which we would through census data, we will not be able to draw down on federal funding. And so if you want funding flowing into our community for all sorts of things, whether it's broadband and connectivity access or healthcare services or mental health care, any kind of social service, we need to fill out the census. The second thing that the census has an impact on, because it is counting population, it has an impact on how lines are drawn for representation. And so the fewer people counted, the less representation we have at the state and federal level. And representation matters particularly in this moment. And so if you do not fill out the census, then we do not have an accurate count of who is in our community, which means we could potentially impact who represents us and how many people represent us, which means our voice could be limited at the state and federal level if we do not fill out the census. It is that imperative. I hate to say vote or die, but it is that imperative this year that we know how we have the right representation, and we will not. That will directly impact representation if we do not fill out the census. And so filling out the census is something that everybody really needs to do.
Yeah, and going off of that, kind of bringing this back to the connectivity context, Bishara touched on this perfectly, but obviously when we have low response rates on the census, that's less money, less political representation, and other resources that our communities will be getting, and that impact lasts for 10 years. We cannot wait another 10 years to get the resources that we need. And so I'm glad we touched on this concept of the census, because this connectivity issue is intertwined with the census in both directions. So low census rates will affect our ability to achieve greater connectivity because we'll have less money, less representation, and less resources to make things happen. But also low connectivity puts us in a place where it's much harder to make sure all Clevelanders fill out the census, because many people fill out their census responses online. That's one of the easiest and fastest ways to fill out the census. So I'm really glad we touched on this, because it's really important to think about the implications that low connectivity has on the census, on voting, and on our entire political system.
Thank you so much. And so as we close up, I would like to ask each speaker to give a 1-minute summary on one key point they hope viewers can take away from this conversation on connectivity. So Bishara, we can start with you.
So I'll say that 1, please fill out the census. 2, please make sure that you're registered to vote and vote in November, and not just in November, but ongoing, because when we think about these pandemics, particularly around racism as a public health issue, that can only be solved at the local level. Not saying that the federal government and national leaders don't play a role, they absolutely do, but when it comes to the criminal justice system, judges are elected locally. And so if you really want to create change in our systems, we have to change who is locally representing us, which means you can't just turn out in a general election or a presidential election, you must vote. And the next and last thought I would offer is that individuals need to develop digital skills. There are a lot of resources in our community to do so, but in order to do that, we absolutely need connectivity. That is an enabling condition, and so we have to solve for that.
Delaney, you want to go next?
Yeah, so if there's anything that I hope viewers take away from this conversation, it's that connectivity is intertwined with almost every other social problem that we're experiencing in our society right now. So this is important and this is urgent. The kids, Cleveland Metropolitan School District kids are going back to school remotely in a few weeks. So we need to act on this now. And I guess my message for viewers would be that this is the time to get or remain civically active, talk to your local officials about this, stay in tune with what EYEJ and the Youth Council are doing around this issue, and get involved. Talk to your local government officials about this. We need to act now.
Definitely. Philip, we'd love to hear from you.
Sure. I agree with what everyone has said. It makes it easy for me to do a concluding comment. But yeah, you know, now is the time to get engaged. This is a critical issue. People have talked about what can be done and the benefits of all of that. So for the listeners, please contact local officials, get engaged with this organization or any way that you can think of otherwise, and make this an issue.
Willis?
Here we go. Okay. Personally, what I would take away is that awareness is growing for the inability of our children to compete on a global scale. Awareness is growing, and if we take that away and we spread the word, as well as do what we can to push forward with a community-based effort for inclusion, I think we will find a solution. We'll find it quickly, and it'll be a lasting one.
Yeah, I thank everyone for this great conversation. I will mention before we need to fill out the census. I think we need access to internet. It's very important because sometimes it's just online. So without internet, I don't know how we can do that and find the accurate data or information we need about our community. But right now we have to think about the current issue in this situation, pandemic situation. Internet or broadband as an internet should not be political issue. It should not be political power. This is a social justice. It's a human being. I say is a human being. We have to think about the next generation future. What kind of society we want to leave to them? We need peace. We need security. We need good health. We need a good education to change or to be present in the world market too. So I will say this requires full participation. We need everyone to get this done. Thank you.
All right, Kendall.
Sorry, I'm moving around so much, but I would say that, like the lady said, this problem does really, I mean, it goes into so many other problems. Like, I feel like everyone plays a part in this. I feel like everybody can relate to this, whether it's no access to, you know, mental health services, no access to, you know, your schoolwork, to job offerings, putting in, you know, applications, whatever it is. I feel like everybody can relate to this. So I feel like, you know, whoever it is, everybody needs to, you know, help with this issue. And another thing is, that was basically what I wanted to say, but, you know, again, this affects everybody, and it is essential that we get this done quick, because again, this is a complex problem. I do feel like it is, but if we work together, this can be resolved, I feel like, quicker than other issues. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists, Bishara Addison, Philip Althouse, Kendall Smith, Janak Pontichobo, Delaney Jones, and Willis Ferguson. On behalf of the EYEJ team, thank you to all the youth, families, community advocates, and social justice warriors who tuned in each week. While many of our conversations were Cleveland or Ohio-centric, we had weekly viewers in Washington, D.C., New York, Maryland, California, and Pennsylvania. Having a national audience shows us that regardless of the city, social justice work and bridging divides between the have and the have-nots is a universal concern for all of us. We appreciate the love you've shown through your comments, likes, shares, and feedback. Most importantly, thank you to the Youth Council, the inspiration for this program. Your commitment to social justice is what compelled us each week to create another episode and was the inspiration for the special two-part series on connectivity. We hope you enjoyed tonight's watch party, and before you go, please take a moment to view the closing credits where we acknowledge all the volunteers who donated their time to make this program a success. So on that note, thank you and good night.